I want to touch briefly on AI to close. Generative AI is becoming the norm in the workplace. Proponents will say this is great for productivity. It's going to free us up to do more creative things. Personally, I think it deadens our soul and our creativity because of outsourcing the tasks. And you've written some really interesting pieces, both on your observations of ancient Greek philosophy, but also on the Pope's view. Talk us through those.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I would agree. I think the main problem with AI, or at least my main fear, is that it encourages intellectual laziness. And I think, given that we're already in a situation where, millennials and Gen Zs report their attention spans being, visibly shrunk. There was a really shocking study done by King's College London recently about attention spans, which, kind of unsurprisingly, but still nonetheless shockingly, revealed the extent to which technology has really already inhibited a lot of that deep thinking. Actually, one of the terms that was used in the study, I can send you a link to it later, was I think deep thinking or something to that effect. And the idea that because of the kind of constant mediation of technology and the constant presence of it, there is just less opportunity for kind of deep internalizing, reflecting, contemplating, all modes of thinking, which were, not only like universal, but just like necessary. Like once we just had more free time to kind of process things. And I think that there is a really important function of long and manual, if you like, thought. And I guess that goes back to this ancient Greek idea that knowledge actually has to be kind of internalized, like the most in terms of like sort of converting mere information to wisdom. It's about knowledge actually being absorbed in your soul. Plato gives this analogy of wax. When you memorize something, you're essentially the external sense object is leaving a kind of impression in your sort of waxen memory, and from that waxen imprint, you're internalizing, and you're then able to kind of go from one experience to an abstract idea, and then ultimately work your way up this kind of divided line of epistemology until you get to the highest truths and nature of things. The reason I mention that is because so central to this Platonic theory of knowledge is really the internalization of knowledge. I'm sure like running this podcast and having your own thoughts about all these kind of philosophical ideas, that the best ideas really do come from being kind of leaving impressions, like thinking about them for a long period of time. And I think my fear with, all technology, but particularly with AI, is that it's kind of circumventing that whole process. Like instead of really mulling over ideas, you can very quickly get ChatGPT, for example, to just kind of conjure up a quick fire explanation. And I'm actually very shocked as well, the number of times in Cambridge, even I'm kind of seeing students in cafes just like quickly generating the odd paragraph or even just sentences on ChatGPT, and then like copying and pasting them into their essays. I'm like, oh, this is, these things are, because they're so tempting, right? Like they really are tempting. It's cutting corners. That's what it is. And I get why people think that it's, it's kind of potentially freeing them up for other things. But I just think that there's really something to be said for actually studying and internalizing information rather than just quickly kind of grabbing it. From these generative systems. Arguably, that's a problem that's existed really since the invention of the internet, which I won't go into today because it would kind of involve a very long genealogy. But yeah, I suppose the other thing just to say about AI, and again, just technology in general, that I think is a particular concern is going back to this nature of the dignity of work and labor, and what you were describing earlier, the difference between a traditional kind of manual process of working and creating that uses, what Zygmunt Bauman called human wetware, like the human faculties, the kind of fleshy, nature of our own embodied condition, versus these kind of digitally mediated, very standardized, very automated modes of work. I think the former, obviously like doing manual tasks is kind of boring and draining and can be exploitative in its own way. So I'm not kind of saying that manual work is always great, but there is certainly a dignity in it. And I think this idea in like dignity in actually working, with your hands, working like on. Sorry, it's very ironic me saying this, like talking to you on a laptop. I'm highly aware, although you'll be pleased to know I did make my notes for this in pen. But I guess, yes, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that I think, the Pope, he did a speech on AI recently, and this was actually a really major point, which is that technology, while it has potential to make work, to improve our quality of lives and to improve work in certain ways, as soon as you make work dependent on technology and you kind of take away the organic human element, people actually just don't find fulfillment in the same way. There isn't this organic process of creation, which I would argue is, and Pope Francis has argued, is so necessary to the fulfillment of our human purpose or teleology. So I think automation, while it's tempting in the short term, I think encourages human inactivity and laziness in ways which I think are only going to prove dangerous, in terms of our intellectual and spiritual development, but also in the sense of it being exploited by these kind of like Silicon Valley monopolies who have basically all of the access to the technology that the world is increasingly becoming dependent on. Those systems all become centralized, and then at the level of just, the average person just trying to make a living, work is increasingly detached from their immediate reality, and it's all in this, abstract system serving, this kind of unnavigable and abstract entity, for want of sounding less vague.
It does make sense, and that's my big worry with AI and generative AI and ChatGPT is that it effectively outsources everything to this black box that you can't see behind. You don't even know how it got there. So even if you could see its workings, you probably wouldn't bother doing it anyway, because why would you do that? Because you've already got the answer. I'm not going to do any more. And yeah, we're not going to see the effects of this until far down the line. It's a bit like the lag that we saw with the launch of the smartphones, which we then saw showing up in mental health crises of kids, and then now the way kids relate to one another, and all of those things that people are shining a light on. And I suppose the only glimmer of hope is I was walking past the school the other day and saw big banners outside, delay smartphones for your kids. It was aimed at parents. And when you listen to psychologists, they're like, oh, it's quite hard to not give kids phones at the moment because of their social zeitgeist. But now parents who are having children now or in the future, they just think, no, there's no way. They're going to follow the Silicon Valley CEO approach and not give them phones until they're 18. So perhaps there might be some kind of social awakening in the next kind of 10 years when people go, oh, do you know what? I feel like I've not really learned anything. I'm just parroting what I've been told by this machine, and maybe I better get back and hit the books. So we can live in hope, Esme.